Hello everyone, this is Steve Smith with ApplicantPro for another edition of Inside MFG. Today we're going to talk about part 2 of the ghosting process during the interview, right? Because oftentimes during the interview process there are times where we lose applicants. So hopefully you've already watched the first video where we talked about some of the elements of the interview process, but now we're going to talk about something even more important, and that is internal accountability with the managers. One of the biggest complaints that recruiters will make, or that other individuals involved in the hiring process will make when they're taking applicants through that process, is delays. Delay is the number one complaint, because what happens is the manager meets with the applicant, they're either unsure or they want to meet with everybody first, and so they want to go through this process. And one of the challenges with that is that there's no clear expectation of a time frame. And this is what we call internal accountability. So as a hiring team or a hiring manager who's going to be responsible for interviewing applicants, you need to make sure you hold those individuals accountable to a time frame and hold them accountable to the decision itself, when the decision has to be made and why the decision has to be made quickly. A statistic right now, if you didn't know this, is that most applicants, when they come onto the job market and are looking for work, by the time they start their job search and they have an offer on the table is 18 days. Think about that for just a moment. If most of the applicants that you want to attract and that you want to work with are off the market within about 18 days, and in some areas it's as low as 14 days with certain types of positions, then that means that as hiring managers and those involved in the hiring process, you have to be accountable to the time frame. You can't delay this. You can't hold off. You can't wait, right? One of the other things that we notice in this study is that you want to make sure that you give immediate feedback after you meet with the applicant, especially if you're meeting with multiple applicants throughout the day, because what happens is managers forget. I don't know about you, but I've interviewed thousands of applicants in my career, and I'll tell you, when I have 8 interviews in one day, I mix them all up all the time. And so getting immediate feedback up front and talking about that applicant, making the appropriate notes, talking with the individuals involved in the process, and just clarifying that that was this applicant before we go to the next applicant is completely appropriate and desirable. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, when you kind of do the synopsis, imagine if you said, oh yeah, that one applicant that was this way or that way, and all of a sudden it was the wrong applicant. That's an embarrassment, because sometimes you have them come in for like a job offer or what have you, and it turns out, oh no, we picked the wrong one. So it's so important to sit down after each individual interview and really make some good notes so that you can recall and remember why you like that applicant in the first place, that gut reaction at that moment, and not the overall synopsis at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying the overall synopsis at the end of the day is bad. That's still good, because now you can do your comparative analysis, but that way you're not confusing the applicants as you go through it. So that internal accountability with your managers, set a proper time frame, make sure that there's clear expectations as how quickly you want the managers to make those decisions, and then hold them accountable to that. Because that is one of the biggest disconnects that we see today. And I'll tell you, it's an element of frustration for applicants, because when the applicant is contacting back and saying, hey, where are we at in the process? And there's no clear communication there, guess what happens? You're more likely to lose them in that process. So ghosting will occur more often when that process is just delayed and delayed and delayed. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go through this, because it's such an important element of the interview process that I think a lot of organizations tend to forget, because sometimes we don't have time, right? Sometimes we feel like we're under pressure, or there's just so much going on that we don't really focus on that interview and the candidate journey, because that's really what's happening. It's this candidate journey. What we also found with frequent communication is an applicant needs to hear from you every other day. And that seems like, whoa, that's crazy. That's a lot of time. But even if it's just to say, hey, we're still meeting with applicants, we'll get back to you, right? Even if it's just as simple as that, let them know at least every other day that this is where we're at in the process. Because what happens is, in the mind of the applicant, especially if they're meeting with other organizations, if those other organizations are moving a lot quicker than you, you're more likely to lose them and be ghosted on, right? Because those applicants are going to say, well, wait a minute, these guys are already getting back to me, so there's an efficiency there. So they see that. That is a reflection of how your organization functions. And they see that as an efficient part of the process, and then they start to worry. They start to get these ideas in their head. Well, if these guys are not as efficient and they're not able to get back to me as quickly, maybe they aren't the right fit after all. And so that's so important. The last thing is this feeling of excitement. You really want to instill this feeling of excitement with your applicants when you're meeting with them, because if they don't really feel excited about the organization, chances are they're just going to ditch you and they're not going to come back. And they're not going to have anything to do with your organization. And that's why the show and tell process that we talked about before, where you actually show them the people they might be working with, and having the people involved in that process really focused on them without distraction, is so important. Because when you have that show and tell, people get excited. Oh, wow, this is what it's going to be like to work here. And that's such an important aspect of this interview process. So communication is key. If you don't have your communication set in stone, that this is the time frame that we're going to look at from the time we start interviews to the time that we make the decision, and your managers are not held accountable to that, you will find that you will lose a lot of applicants, especially in this market right now, because they're getting snatched up so quickly. So it's such an important aspect, and just remember those elements as you look at your interview process today.